Welcome to the first annual T.S. Eliot Memorial Reading. I'd like to begin by expressing my immense gratitude to the Carpenter Center for allowing us the use of this magnificent space, and to the T.S. Eliot Foundation for suggesting the creation of this annual series and for so generously supporting it. During one of T.S. Eliot's many mid-century visits to Cambridge, he happened to attend a performance by one of the authors that he'd been advocating for many years, the inimitable Juna Barnes. The reading was held just a few blocks away from here, away from these flowers, and it was hosted by a woman named Mary Manning Howe, also known as the mother of the poets Fanny and Susan Howe, one of whom is in the audience this evening. One of the attendees of the Barnes event observed, quote, "There was an intermission and coffee was produced. The only thing Eliot said all evening was, 'Cream, no sugar,' and we all were waiting around for his wisdom." In the fine Eliot tradition of attrition and of keeping the word count down, I will try to keep my opening remarks short to make way for Teju Cole's introduction. But I do want to take a moment to speak to the convergence of lives and minds in this room tonight and to these musics. Tonight, we honor the work of two Harvard graduates, T.S. Eliot and Fred Moten, both of whose lives also intersected briefly with the poetry room and share what one scholar has called a phonographic logic. As you probably know, the Poetry Room was responsible for making Eliot's first poetry recording in 1933. And after the war, Eliot returned to create a long playing record, which took place over several days in durations, partially probably due to his acoustic finickiness. Bear in mind that this was the first generation of poets to hear their own voices separated from their bodies, but also due to certain auditory adventures of the discs themselves and the labor involved in making them. Portions of the love song A Jail for Prufrock were damaged at the record plant, compelling certain sections to be re-recorded by engineers in London. And some of those discs subsequently broke in transit back across the Atlantic, so that the 1948 recording we have of Prufrock is a composite of several times and discontinuous takes and dual citizenships, a ruptured or sutured sociability, which came to live seemingly seamlessly as an LP single in living rooms across America, extending its invitation, "Let us go then, you and I. May we be sometime, almost now, together." This evening is titled A Memorial to Eliot, but it's also perhaps more impersonally, to use his favorite word, a recognition of the process of passage and progress that his work invokes and involves us in, the elemental question and provocation and portal he presents to us. Shall we go there? Do we dare enter the unknown in front of us? To commemorate Eliot is not to omit critique of him, which he as a critic always invited to walk beside him, but is to respect the vulnerable extension of any poet's voice into the stream of knowledges, which is always changing. Each word we speak is a memorial to a human or humans who passed a sound, a syllable, a sign, a word, a torch, one person further in the long relay. The presence of our honored guest tonight, Fred Moten, magnifies these ideas of transmission, and his work is a memorial and momentum to the endangered passage of persons, messages, musics across spaces and times. His music is, as Ronaldo V. Wilson writes, quote, "a way into the moment in which we are constantly accompanied by dissonance and by additional life, a consent, as Moten writes, to not being a single." Introductions are a place of passage to what is next and near and revered. And tonight I've invited a person capable of great presence and passage and brilliance and grace, someone whose recent collaborator described his work as at once, quote, "profoundly heartening and capable of harnessing deep indignation and searing insight." Teju Cole is an award-winning novelist, photography editor of the New York Times Magazine, Gore Vidal Professor of Creative Writing at Harvard, and authored most recently of Human Archipelagos, which insists on questions of kinship and hospitality in the face of people driven from their homes by war and by the redrawing of national boundaries. Please welcome Teju Cole, who will do the introduction.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. How are you? Day began with no need for a coat. I think you sort of need a coat now. But that's April. I was going to say Fred Moten's whole thing is freedom. Then I decided not to third person the man, not to explain the man or other him. So let me begin by saying, Fred, your whole thing is freedom. Your whole thing is freedom and vigor. That's two things. Freedom and vigor and love. 3. Feeling free. Let me begin by saying, one student in one of my classes asked, this is a student in the class I call Breaking Form, what's the difference between witness and withness? And given a choice or restricted to one of the two, he asked, which would I choose? And I thought of you and your whole thing with, which is love. And I said, if I absolutely had to choose between witness and withness all the way, just being there with. Let me begin by saying that every now and again, there'll be a news story, or maybe it happened just one time. But in any case, there's an Englishman who has a stroke, and when he comes out of it, he's only able to speak Welsh. Aphasia. The language coming through him from God knows where. Like how your work redirects me and us into some other fluency. Before I continue, let me begin by saying, we who is my long-standing response to the uninterrogated we's that litter the common dialect. They say we, and I say we who. But then again, in full spate, writing about Cecil Taylor, almost as a throwaway, you wrote, who? We. Who, question mark, we, exclamation point. And you reversed my shit. Begin with fragments of language coming into view. Escape is an activity, not an achievement. Lord. I'm going to begin by borrowing a thought from Glisson. When we regard each other, we should tremble. He has this thing about tremblement, which I read as a kind of generalized holy awe. In the rites of writerly intimacy, I can feel you said to me of something you wrote or said. It's not as though James Baldwin said anything to me, or Toni Morrison said anything to me, or you said anything to me, but there it is. Through the rite of writerly intimacy, it's all personal. It's all you said to me. As you said to me the other day, it's about difference without separability. Language keeps coming out, only the speaker changes. Everything is blurring beautifully, and from time to time, some member of the clan is issuing forth to take a solo and falling back into the collective. I can't get started. Let me begin by saying how nice it is to be here with. I know we had to reschedule this, but witness doesn't fret about clocks or calendars. We give thanks for your health. It's marvelous to be contemporaneous. Tremblement. Deferred meaning, the way your poetry is always rescheduling what all the words mean. Or perhaps I should begin by including the people in the room and giving them a list of some things that are factually true of you, that you studied at Harvard and Berkeley with a PhD from the latter, that you're a professor in the Department of Performance Studies at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, the author of numerous books, including the celebrated poetry volumes, The Field Trio and The Little Edges, the head-juddering trifecta that constitutes Consent Not to Be a Single Being, that your whole thing is love, that you're a dropper of science, a mentor to many, a wizard of a liberatory futurity, maternal presence, inheritor of and teacher in the Black radical tradition, sonic sage, and the ideal person to be with in this room on this day. But I wanted to begin with a thing that happened in my other class the other day. It's a thing about how the query is a form of generosity that leads you somewhere you needed to go. Lacan said, a letter will always arrive at its destination. This is the class I call Writing Critically. I had come to class sort of half hiding my face. I'd made the students read about 60 pages of In the Break, but also being sort of thug about it. Look, you're fit for it. It won't hurt you to do the work. So I stopped hiding my face and I just said, let's talk about how a text like this teaches you how to read it. What do you learn about how to read when you read In the Break? What do you learn by reading In the Break about how to read? And they said all the smart and perceptive things you might expect from living people, you know, about reading it by flowing with it, reading it like a piece of music you're listening to. The language coming through them because the language came through you. We survived the session. They didn't hate me too much. Some even liked it. I stopped hiding my face. But the real gem for me was a moment of witness at the very end of class when one of my students said, well, isn't there some worry that a text like this is so complex and so difficult that it goes over the heads of the people it's for? We sat with that for a moment. Then I said, well, who's it for? And it was evident he maybe meant Black folk or folks without money or folks with not so much schooling or some combination of the three. And I said, yes, it's difficult, but you did the work and you got there. And whoever it's for will find their way there too. A letter will always arrive at its destination. I said, who has the right to difficulty? Is it only for the elite? I think one of the most generous things you can do is to be discursively difficult, because then your interlocutor knows how deeply you respect them. Because life is difficult, and this is language seeking parity with that. He found that believable. And his query gave me a way of articulating what I already thought about your work. But I'll begin by saying something a friend of mine said last night as we approached our third glass of wine. Cardi B is complicated. Fred.
Wow. How can I begin after all those beautiful beginnings? It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so thankful for the fact that Christina and the Eliot Foundation invited me and also had the kindness to reschedule when I wasn't able to be here a couple of weeks ago. I'm grateful and thankful for that. I'm grateful and thankful for the beautiful introduction, Teju, and I'm grateful and thankful for your writing and your work, and particularly for how, as a new person in a new city, which is, even though I lived in New York before, this last return I was a new person in a new city. So much had changed over the intervening 20 years. But you made that city open to me in your writing. and you and Julius have been my guide. And so I thank you for that and for everything else. I actually have so much stuff to say that I don't even know if I'm going to get to the reading any poetry. It's like there's so many things on my mind. I've been back here a few times since I graduated, but this is the first time, I guess you could say, that I've been back here in a way where I'm not anesthetized. And for me, this place was such an ordeal that I also had the kind of strange misfortune of feeling in my own heart I needed to be grateful for having gone through, and knowing that that was true, that whenever I returned, I always had to, for a long time, as I said, sort of re-anesthetize myself. I had to go back into whatever bag I had that allowed me to get through here in the first place. And I'll tell you, when it, it was really the last time I was here to read at the Woodbury Poetry Room when I didn't feel that way. Couple reasons why. One, when I walked into Lamont Library to go to the poetry room, which was sort of my haven when I was here, or I actually worked when I was here, when I looked to the right, I saw this beautiful portrait of a great man named David Evans, who's been an admissions officer here at Harvard for many, many years, and who any black student over the last 40 years owes thanks, because he was the one who fought and scratched and kicked to get us all here. He's from West Memphis, Arkansas, and I think he made a special effort to get me here because I was coming from a small town in Arkansas as well. And when I saw that portrait of Mr. Evans, it kind of allowed me to take a little bit of my guard down. And then when I went up into the poetry room, I looked and I saw a familiar face, or at least a familiar profile, a familiar body. And when she looked up, I realized it was Eileen Miles, or when they looked up. And so between Eileen Miles being at the poetry room and Mr. Evans' portrait, it felt like maybe I didn't have to steel myself just to come back here. And I always came back because I had friends here and mentors here who were very important to me. One, Bill Corbett, who we lost last year, but who was a totally important central figure, not only in the Boston literary scene, but in my own education and development. And I also had another mentor whose presence always drew me back, and particularly drew me back along with my friend, my best friend from here, Stefano Harney. He was our mentor and teacher. And he passed away yesterday, Martin Kilson. And I wanna think about him and honor him tonight. His knowledge, his style, which was absolutely inimitable, and his generosity. I mean, he, maybe more than anybody, showed me what it might be like to be an intellectual, if that's still possible. He was the first black professor at Harvard University. He was Frank G. Thompson Professor of Government for many years, retired in 1999. But his being the first black professor at Harvard is more of an indictment of Harvard than it is an honor to him. What he did and how he lived and how he worked was way more important than whatever first thing he was. So I just want to mention again his name, Martin Luther Kilson, Jr. So I'm going to read some poetry in a minute. You know, I want to read a letter, or an excerpt from a letter that T.S. Eliot wrote to Herbert Reed, dated St. George's Day, which is April 23rd, 1928. He writes, "Someday, I want to write an essay about the point of view of an American who wasn't an American because he was born in the South and went to school in New England as a small boy with a nigger drawl, but who wasn't a Southerner in the South because his people were Northerners in a border state and looked down on all Southerners and Virginians, and who so was never anything anywhere." Now, the easy brutality with which Eliot describes his own nigger drawl ought not, because we can't afford it to let it, undermine the truth that it bears. My favorite line of Eliot's poetry is just not even a line, it's a phrase from a small tribute he wrote to, I guess what we would now call a relatively obscure, but once revered, 20th century English poet named Walter de la Mare. And in that little fragment of a poem, he talks about what he calls the inexplicable mystery of sound. And I always loved that line, and I always thought that line, in addition to being something that Eliot used to describe another poet, was something that we could also use always to describe him. There was always, for me, an inexplicable mystery in his sound. There was always something in the way that he both used but also broke iambic pentameter from the very earliest stages of his career, in the preludes and in Proof Rock and Portrait of a Lady, that I was drawn to. But it wasn't because I was so much drawn to iambic pentameter. I was drawn to something that disturbed and depurified iambic pentameter. And I remember this because I remember when the BBC decided to do all of the Shakespeare plays, to make new television productions of all the Shakespeare plays, and there was some consternation, particularly with regard to Othello, partly because at around that time, James Earl Jones had done a celebrated performance of Othello on Broadway, and there was this sense that who would be a better Othello than Jones, and the BBC and the people who advised them on these productions said, no, we can't have Jones. We can't have an American. We just don't think that an American can quite get the rhythm and the flavor of the iambic pentameter. And so I think what maybe I recognize in Eliot's voice, what I was drawn to, and I remember walking around on some of these same Cambridge streets that he was writing about, walking around on with his sound and with his voice in my ear. But I remember thinking, there's something off in his speech. I wouldn't have characterized it as a nigger drawl. But this was before Toni Morrison gave us another kind of discourse to be able to describe both what it is that was embedded in Eliot's voice, and also what it is that he wanted so desperately to get out of his voice. She uses the term an Africanist presence. And she talks about how that infuses all of American literature, in spite of American literature's best efforts to excise it. And what's at stake here is not just that there's blackness in the sound of American literature that American literature can never get rid of, but that blackness constitutes always this radical disruption of any possible understanding of purity, which is to say, the radical disruption of every brutalist, right-wing, fascist, royalist politics, which is predicated on the idea and the fantasy of purity. That Eliot could both hear this at the same time that even in the way in which he described it constitutes a disavowal is something that, attests both to his prescience as a critic and also his limits as a person. But, part of what it means to be a black student is always to confront the horrible fact of needing something sometimes from people who you desperately don't want to need anything from. And I needed something from Eliot. I needed that sound. I needed the way he thinks. I needed his brilliance. I needed it against his grain. I needed to be able to deploy it against him. And in a weird way, I needed to be able to deploy it against him on his behalf, insofar as always what it showed was that there was something in him that needed to be salvaged, something in him that needed to be saved. So I'm not ambivalent about being here in honor of Eliot. I'm happy to be here in honor of the inexplicable mystery of Eliot's sound, okay, against the grain of the rather more brutal and utterly explicable non-mysteries, right, of some of the stuff he says, okay. So I'm happy to be here for Eliot, and I'm happy to be here with you, Christina, and you, Teju, and everybody else, and I'm especially happy to be here in honor of my friend and my mentor and my teacher, Martin Kilson. So, okay, now I can read some poetry. So basically, in keeping with some of what I was just talking about, I want to start with, I'm going to read a couple things from a new book that will be out in a few months called All That Beauty. I'm going to read the first piece in All That Beauty, which is called A Prefatory Note. And then I'm going to read another piece from All That Beauty called Sudden Rise at a Given Tune. And I'll try to talk about these pieces enough so you can get them. A Prefatory Note has 3 epigraphs, all of which are from James Baldwin. About my interests, I don't know if I have any, unless the morbid desire to own a 16mm camera and make experimental movies can be so classified. That's from Notes of a Native Son. When I was very young and was dealing with my buddies in those wine and urine-stained hallways, something in me wondered, what will happen to all that beauty? For Black people, though I am aware that some of us, Black and white, do not know it yet, are very beautiful. And when I sat at Elijah's table and watched the baby, the women, and the men, and we talked about God's or Allah's vengeance, I wondered, when that vengeance was achieved, what will happen to all that beauty then? That's from Close to the End of the Fire Next Time. And this one's a little longer. My father said during all the years I lived with him that I was the ugliest boy he had ever seen, and I had absolutely no reason to doubt him. But it was not my father's hatred of my frog eyes which hurt me, this hatred proving in time to be rather more resounding than real. I have my mother's eyes. When my father called me ugly, he was not attacking me so much as he was attacking my mother. No doubt, he was also attacking my real and unknown father. And I loved my mother. I knew that she loved me, and I sensed that she was paying an enormous price for me. I was a boy, and so I didn't really too much care that my father thought me hideous. So I said to myself, this judgment, nevertheless, was to have a decidedly terrifying effect on my life. But I thought that he must have been stricken blind, or was as mysteriously wicked as white people, a paralyzing thought, if he was unable to see that my mother was absolutely, beyond any question, the most beautiful woman in the world. So here now was Betty Davis on that Saturday afternoon in close-up over a champagne glass, pop eyes popping. I had caught my father not in a lie, but in an infirmity. For here, before me, after all, was a movie star, white. And if she was white and a movie star, she was rich, and she was ugly. I felt exactly the same way I felt just before this moment or just after, when I was in the street playing and I saw an old, very black and very drunk woman stumbling up the sidewalk. And I ran upstairs to make my mother come to the window and see what I had found. You see, she's uglier than you, Mama. She's uglier than me. Out of bewilderment, out of loyalty to my mother, probably. And also because I sensed something menacing and unhealthy, for me, certainly, in the face on the screen. I gave Davis's skin the dead white greenish cast of something crawling from under a rock. But I was held, just the same, by the tense intelligence of the forehead, the disaster of the lips, and when she moved just like a nigger. Eventually, from a hospital bed, she murders someone, and Spencer Tracy takes the weight to Sing Sing. In his arms, Davis cries and cries, and the movie ends. What's going to happen to her now? I asked Bill Miller. We don't know, said Bill, conveying to me, nevertheless, that she would probably never get over it, that people pay for what they do. That's from The Devil Finds Work. The truth to which criticism has access fades to blur, and we're sorry for our reckless scrutiny. But the study that soils transparency and the rightful belief that it reveals an opacity that's always there need offer no apology to James Baldwin, since it's he who teaches us to look so closely that we see all dark through what we see. Criticism is supposed to let you see through that. Criticism is poetry in this regard. And in this regard, Baldwin is more plus less than either critic or poet or both. He makes us let us look for ourselves and through ourselves till we're beside ourselves. To be beside ourselves with holy looking is to practice Baldwin's selflessness, which is only his to give away in demanding that we see through him too, in pursuit of impure, eccentric fugue, rather than the chaste satisfaction that's said to live in one-on-one relation. Fugitive in small groups, dispossession flays the pair's impossible monogamy and folds to nothing, where there are no things. Such movement intimates black indecision, which is given in the setting of the scene, which incompletes, unsettles, and upsets the scene. It's inappropriate and inappropriable. Ain't no grasping presence to be grasped, no endless fight for standing to withstand, just this anaproprioceptive falling into tangled discords felt review. Such movement intimates black metaphysics, almost. All in transport, all the way up in here, way out from there, where Harlem is nowhere, in passage, the indexical play of observer and observed, theorist and theorized, dreamer and dreamed, ebbs in topographical caress. Glistening, unheld in gazing, intricate toward gala, neither here nor there we go, down at the cross. The more we read all that beauty, the more unreadable we are. Transparency tries to hide a grammatical black hole, a spiraling refusal of singularity that flares us into visionary company. It all has to do with it, this apposition in the scene, his deposition of scenography. He brings us with what he is and sees, which is us, or we're brought with them in what he's not and sees through. That embrace, the ecstatic terrain of all that beauty, is Baldwin's function. He's like a telephonic switch in a telephoto lens, seeing doubly seen through, sounding life, but seen with, too, as if three and more plus less. Mass found in variable densities of blessing, gliding, Jimmy in them its study, todo mundo de portela, foretelling, divining that confabulous, alchimeric way we move in camera. His is the eye through which the scene he's in is seen. He stays there like a loving machine, but on the way, his eyes not now his own in being seen through by the others who can't see, but somehow see the fate of all that beauty. All this turbulence comes with that, which is so emphatically not this, subventing by subverting some kind of living in our terribleness with hard, delicate extra retrospection. Derivative of this in its egocentric particularity, that drifts in crowded, nervous torpor. Those hallways go everywhere but gone, but something else is held in something being held off in the making, bending, crumpling of a dislocation where buddies are and have no bodies. The nearly metaphorical errancy of that is there to let us know he doesn't merely look at us, he looks on us, and in that burden we are covered and unenframed. We live where you and I can't live, which is the truth of all that beauty, which we protect and convey as lovers. Where do you get eyes to see all that like that? Against the grain of the Father's desperate and uncertain cruelty, which he never ceased writing about and trying to understand and forgive and indeterminate, Baldwin is mama's baby all along. Look how he sees through himself in Betty Davis's eyes. What's going to happen to her now? What will happen to all that ugly beauty then? What happens when we murmur, throng, and shudder? There's a word sheaf arrayed in morbid experimental want, a wet, atonal burst of seasoned speech as if in every gaze lay the molten structure of another language. All that enchevêtrement so sharp, so fly, so undivisible, you have to put your sunglasses on so you can feel it, like Elizabeth Eckford. The Little Rock Nine and the Harlem Six and the Little Rock Nine of Harlem swing those wine and urine-stained hallways, and in preoccupied company, Kluck twirls revisionary nightsticks. That's our braille and brushed prosaics. Our shedding sheds the portrait in the sharding of the mirror. Then here come the earth in threads. Its nature having risen, its finger optic love come down, hand and eye uncoordinate but social and unbearably inseparable. Relation slides in monkish transposition, cenobitic sight off sight, exogamous insight flown off the handle, unowned, uncitable, dispersively excited, exotic jam, all exit all the time in Cenoballet's shaded glance, grave, ungraven, unworldly, 'cause we're too from the good black dirt, index all and arranged, all frayed and arabesque, pointing, fringing back at its own heart, which brings on the juice of our broken flesh, our little broken flasha, our blurred and burled, unoriented surface. The wine, the blood, the shot, the scene, all dance. Oh man, it's all a kind of miracle. Down here with us because he looks like us, because he looks like her. They tell us how to look like them so we can reach through us to what we share. So, sudden rise at a given tune also has epigraphs. It's kind of, and I think maybe part of what Teju was referring to about the width is that the poems in this book, although I don't know if they're poems, I'm not sure. They're in some kind of, I think it's poetry, but I don't know if there are any poems in here. But it's criticism in here too. And maybe I was trying to not have a dog in the fight between poetry and criticism, or prose and verse for that matter. But the pieces in here are written, they're with people, not for them or to them. So sudden rise at a given tune with Wu, Tosh, Zoe, Chili, Josh Johnson, Anna Marsoff, Patrick Baliga, and Lygia Lewis in them. Now, in them, okay, that's a, that's from my, that's a black vernacular, or at least a Las Vegas from Arkansas black vernacular formation. The way you would sort of spell it is apostrophe N, apostrophe EM, and it's short for and them. But of course, and them is short for any number of other people who don't need to be named right now, but who are definitely present. Who you going to the store with? Junior and them, you know? So actually, I got fascinated by that. I don't know what it is, phoneme, when, actually phoneme has the, phoneme is spelled P-H-O apostrophe N apostrophe E-M-E, so pho and them, which makes it some, which brings the whole Vietnamese soup kind of thing into it, which is cool, but fun them, right? Which reminds me of the, man, when I was in grad school, I lived in Oakland, 1515 Alice. And there was a Vietnamese pho restaurant that opened right on the corner, I guess it was 14th Street and Alice. So I used to go there all the time, and I remember these kids, these young black kids came in and they wanted some food, and they were just, I actually think that probably, I shouldn't say that, but I was shocked too the first time I ordered the soup because it was so beautiful. You know, it looked too beautiful to eat. It looked like you shouldn't eat it, partly because it was so beautiful, but then partly because you're not supposed to eat beautiful things, and so there must be something. Anyway, but and I remember this one kid was like, I can't eat this, but I ain't eating that with no lily pads in it. I love Oakland. So that's one of those kind of things that happens in Oakland. Anyway, so that's in them. But the other in them story is my mom did all this political work in Las Vegas, and one time during the election season, they had a kind of fundraiser at this club called the Colony Club, and the band that was playing had this great name, still for me the greatest band name ever, Clyde and Them and Her. So they were like a cover band, and they did a great version of the Ohio Players' Skin Tight. So, anyway, okay. Sudden rise at a given tune, 2 epigraphs. First from Langston Hughes, second from Du Bois. Drowning a drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play. As, however, we rise in the realm of conduct, we know the primary and a secondary rhythm. A primary rhythm depending, as we have indicated, on physical forces and physical law. But within this appears again and again a secondary rhythm which, while presenting nearly the same uniformity as the first, differs from it in its more or less sudden rise at a given tune. 1. How can violence be such a balm? The criminal animation of a more than natural law, anageridical movement in theater's interstitial space, an experimental acting out of anchoritic cell and cause. The secret life of things is open, made plain, phenomenal ding hiss, this thing we are, all these things we are, all this, all we keep trying to get to, all we can't get back to, all miles ahead in nothingness is all that's left. Maybe the problem is simply looking at, which is to say listening to. How can you show the out-circularity of that perception? Its difficult pleasures of return and syntax, its embedded, imperceptible hesitations in miniature seismic events, its pulsive touches, its dis plus hyperlexic scratches and scars. 2. What is slave language? What's it mean to be published? Does displacement make me play the agent of my displacement, or does it let me murder my ideal? What if lyric poetry regurgitates identity? Then Phyllis Wheatley is fresh and flesh, and fly is rumination syndrome. Psyche is the residue of her indigestion, which is nurture. Rumination wanders, a resuscitative essay on the run, but you never get there. All that heavy Plymouth plantation peculiarity, voluntary, involuntarily on trial, on edge, over the edge, and curved, scooped, sloped, depressive, manic. T is musical, a one-note, one-pulse percussive flight of emphatic dig, like I ain't going anywhere. Authentic mantic gesture is I, and I ain't going nowhere. Who you looking at falls to where you looking from, when you looking. Ask and you can cut when and where. You cannot remember where or when. You can trace the genealogy of Baldwin's eyes with a little piece of rough silk to get the tactile sense of something going on. It's like Chile cussing out Siri again. It's like when Arendt writes to Jaspers, I've begun so late, really, only in recent years, truly to love the world. Within a certain relegation to the private, given in the form of rescue, this can only be expressed in a sealed envelope or whispered with deviant love to your rose gold avatar. Baldwin says there's something ironic and violent and perpetually understated in Chile's speech. It's something tart, authoritative, and double-edged, something you can hear whenever you hear a Negro play like Langston. It's almost like being in love for those who have never been covered or born in distress or have no toposociological hitch, no quantum sociological pause, no subatomic subspace slide. 3. Feeling, sweet feeling drops from my fingertips. The tips imagine auto-excessive caress and come from that imagining. They dance into the scene, and the difference in dancing through seeing is inseparable. Hearing saves the place it makes by changing. They prepare a table by twisting, stretching, and wrinkling. Gluing and tearing can't be excluded from remorseless working. What it is to taste mass in the heart of eccentricity. What it is, celebration shot down, unburied, unrisen, listening and looking, hearing and seeing, till one another fly away. I wish I could caress, turn myself off and go on down. 4. Used to run into this kid at Doe. We'd be browsing the stacks on the top floor, looking at books that explore the frontier between mathematics and philosophy, circling ideas of mathematical existence or notions concerning the reality of mathematical objects, courting Black study where continuity, compactness, connectedness, the active sounding of our spooky distancing, nearing, overlap, is a way of walking down the street in love. If there's that divinatory thinking that Oscar Becker calls mantic phenomenology, then maybe there's a mantic disposition that puts the phenomenological consensus out on the floor, turning like never to return. What's the relation between fugitive monasticism and the paradisiacal garden? What's the relation between the paradisiacal garden and a hard row to hoe? What's the difference between Moses the Black and Black Moses? What's the difference between Harriet Tubman and Isaac Hayes? Is the theft of stolen moments some new asceticism? Is there an aesthetics of the transubstantial feast? Our odious lingering was aerotopology by an ice blue stream, like shelves of noise in curve and recess, like the continual forming of a pit. When people move, they move topologically and topographically, meditating through the duet towards O, the open cell. It's not that O comes first, it's that it comes to fuck first up. Hey Tosh, hey Josh, form a pit of iterative presences in a field, grass cat tapped down in swirled squares, little phantasmagoric agoras of rubfall. Earth makes place through world where we hold, where study, strain through set logic, stack cruising, till after 30 years, he whispers, Zalamea. 5. A drum is a woman's club. All the symbols are double envelopes and difference engines, bringing in the sheaves of palm and olive, the innumerable bundles of ointment and anointment that render every unit Sicilian and impure, mouths filled with the South in streams, coming virtually through themselves like murmuring birds that get here before they leave there, which they theorize as a new bouquet, a newspaper called The Mystery, a project taking shape and losing it, giving shape away with sharp turns and jumped back homotopic kisses off schedule, margins at the center of their thought, which gloriously falls to preserve all that Shivi breath in lapsed concentration by deforming it like a quartet for the end of time's live stream. And where matter is present in nothing, like a fade of porches, leaps in and through the leaves in the surrealization of its seriality, Daniel Ham announces a method for the torture of mothers. Black ink is blues blood in manifold, breeze blood in imaginary axes, phase systems out of spiritual linen, rhythm sections out of silk, some pulse fabric in caressive trap field in a bruised description of this skein, of this continuity, silt animated, exhausted, like a choir come out of paper in a reading from the Book of Thunder. Streams in the mouth of Florida and more, biscuits of air let go in bursts of hand shear, sheaves of sheaves raised up like leavened stone. Don't cite black women, recite black women, their doubt percussion, their sister tour, their heavy water. 6. That's the communicability of the shoe. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness in the whipping machine through its power to individuate. They kill him every day, and grace is everywhere in fasting. The fluorescent aestheticism of the sheaf. Giving is everything and more, that's all. That's all. The exhaustive communicability of the shoe. He was blessed and cursed with visitors, the terrible aestheticism of the sheaf. They came with plates and tea in the name of the Crenshaw Legal Clinic. They came as violent, lonely mothers, the essential habit of assembly in a blue concert, the fleet communicability of the shoe, the tortured imperative to rest in power, primordially empty spaces in the mix. Come levy rents here if you can. The perfect astigmatism of the sheaf, what harmonizes things and what's awry in them, all sharing middle distance, nothing different, all the same, at a sudden rise in the endlessly anarrhythmic way we stave off starving. That's the communicability of the shoe. All right. So, I don't know how long I've been going. So I'll read the great critics Lauren Berlant and Kathleen Stewart co-authored a book called The Hundreds, and it's a beautiful book of sort of experimental theory, maybe, I guess you could say. And they asked me to write an index for it, so I did, so I'll read that. So this is Index with Lauren Berlant and Kathleen Stewart in them. There's too much pointed repeating to point at, being caught up in it. The overall is all over the place, numberless and thick and thin. No place to go is all over the place. Shifters, riffless because the splits are staggered, get their drink on. Echoes can't get located, Obvious things gone aviary, map flown all over the place. We're missing the overall. You're missing the overall, this way free, that way green, stuck way out like this, when don't you know the day's abroad? Outnumbered, parenthetical finger pointing around the corner, won't straighten all up and can't straighten how you straighten up in the morning. All your voices unraveling while your voices lounge in the overall. What pleasure had these tracks laid down? Nothing but all that shifting, how the road turns over the edge of anything you be trying to do. Let's call this song exactly what it is. In lieu of its name, let's call it you or y'all. All y'all up in there started flying out of place, started missing, started can't get started, won't fly right, can't get it straight, can't turn it loose, but there it go. And now it's gone, and there y'all go again, can call it, but can't point to it. Y'all keep saying, that's what I'm talking about, don't even sound right. And now you want an index? And that's just what y'all be always talking about with all the voices in your voices and their outstretched hands. The overall is alert to this dancing more than singing, y'all said. And there's a hand jive with some presence in it all throughout, but no place special, off to the side, glancing at all the colors in 33rd. Level, degree, resource, flicker back and forth all over the place. Amarillo all over the place as sunlight, called exactly what it is, but pointed out only so we can say what it feels when we describe it. Get it all down to the point of it being all y'all all over the damn place. It feels terribly beautiful. It feels terribly beautiful everywhere you went. So I started doing this thing I have this trouble where I can't distinguish between laziness and overwork. It's a specifically American disease, right? Like the harder you work, the lazier you think you are, right? It's just another reason why shit has to just be torn down, right? It's hard for me. I have a hard time sometimes saying no, so I would get invited to do stuff and I had to give a talk. So I figured out this thing where I'd be like, okay, let me just talk at the end. And I would just sit there and take notes and say, I'll just give a summary of what happened. And it sort of turned into this thing where it's like a kind of performance and poetry. And it actually turned out to be not such a bad thing. And I started calling these things impromptus. So I was just at a conference that some friends of mine and colleagues organized as a kind of exhibit commemorating the 50 years, I think, of the Dance at Judson Church program. So it was at the PS1 MoMA in Queens. And so they had a kind of program, and I did this impromptu there. And then I kept working on it. So this is Judson Church Impromptu with Anna Janevsky and Thomas Lax and Malik and KJ Holmes and Ramsey Amin and Claire Croft and Marina Rosenfeld with Greg Fox and Eli Kessler and Andre Lepecki and Gus Solomons Jr. and Barbara Klassen and Philip Cornet with Iris Brooks, Daniel Dinmitz, Daniel Good, Phoebe Neville, and Lena Marika Papich in them. Idiom, which is chordal and cultural, revoices an irrevocable, irrecoverable throwing off, some gone-off fallenness and pretty falling. The case of dance, off dance, if dance is what we translate, crossing over into falling, throwing off already given a little bit just in speaking of the language of dance, even when part of how dancers move is speech, or what fails or is thrown off speech. Though I am too unhipped to dance, having a hip and a half in my walking stick and move, I like to pirouette like starry night. In my head I be bugging, sharing jitter in repose, though it's hard to remember all that company. Adam says it's hard to remember Steve. We perseverate our severance. We cut each other off to make each other up. I forget all the time, so I be going back to church until I'm almost gone, and Chasky is an Andean message, and the discontinuous warp and weft of their drumming is our dissolving, our absolution, our martyrdom before the first martyr, Cecilia Santiago del Sol, the brother of the beloved. What if art is the veneration of the brother of the beloved? She gives before the first one gives, thread as this ongoing miracle we forget before we forget the beloved whom you and I desire, not because our desire is wrong, but because our object got to go. Gone before our object go, our brother disappears into suspense, a definition you can't override or underwrite, an exact slur. The true church walks away in archipelagos of itself, in exodus from Zion, in a dance in which Iglesia exudes itself, in case y'all want to start getting transitioned. Sisters, flaunt your new anointing in the street, out past the urban policy of the park, then come back nude into desire, in sequined friction, from behind all our surrounding. The topographical distress of the church is what I'm trying to put in words. I'm trying to pull this dry rub out of words into the bare embrace of them beside themselves, beside me. We're beside ourselves together when she starts singing to abandon all inside. Welcome all that bowing of her hand, disrupting sequence when beloved gives off beside, aquel abrazo, all that weaving, that irrevocable greeting, all this raving, irrecoverable being beside ourselves in common saving, which is not the same as being and not the same as not being. This more plus less than James the Greater having gone and given over in this opening, this greeter who bade me welcome to that open trio, that rub obad this afternoon, that great getting up, that mood for love or love 3. Howard Moody, you come on in, man. You can blow now if you want to. We're through. Amen. Amen. All out the box and being all up in it. In the event of something left to be desired, desire always leaves something to be desired. We should leave all that alone. It's the shit sometimes, but it's residual, and we want to be workers in being desired and walking and falling across, writing, dancing out of writing without falling in love and dancing through the church into the mess Mass gives away. Is it the same thing to exude and reside? Is it the same thing to reside and be left over? Is it the same thing to leave and be left? Have we left for the lesbian future? Did we leave for that when we left for church? When we left the church, did we leave all that behind? Fallen for having fallen. Having fallen as all you sexes be too true to be good, having been bad welcome. Having fallen for Fred like Ginger never fell, like Fred for Jill and Jose haunting. Having left Holy Ghost behind to fugue from all up in it, all off, all fallen through. What else was heavy preparation non-performing? Marielle's affirmative strike is the general snow at the end of the dead. Let's cool one, rumbling, ooh, you're cooing, just like the police gonna come. Now, let's talk about this imperative of welcome when the police come. Not when we welcome out of desire for the shit we have, but the welcome when we leave all that behind, the welcome when we never welcome them again. Why is this openness in saying no percussive as a beating? Whatever felt good of drumming is left in bruise. I'm repeating that, having been repeated by that by Langston Hughes, and in that, in the mess of Papa don't, Papa don't, Papa don't, Papa don't take no mess, which is man's elucidation of the law of the Father, so you know all that beauty bears all that beating, all that noise, then dance to that to prepare to revise in welcoming some yes when the image is off in half slash while we wait. While we wait through the half projected half slash of lost dances, waiting for dancers in italics, in the beauty of the general plan of dancing in the solidus, in this ongoing walking the plan, in remembering that the Police are a pop band, that their greatest hits all but embarrass the love of Stuart Copeland's Time Machine. Different in green advent just past Sunday morning like a bird, the inadvertent freedom of whose non-event, that nativity again, that here he come like baby Dodge gets called by Buddy Bolden, which makes me want to say callin'. Can I say callin'? Will I have to say falled and fail, not start, native again already, all over everywhere like an inseparable matrix we gotta separate? I italicize so I can see and say I saw. From a grid I gave myself so I could give myself to it, so I could act like I ain't got nothing to give, which is what we sheave, a slant we share, a little leaf we leave and mull, some wine we think. No. The openness of our no is this other no in the seductive wiles of moving and being moved in rhythm cloth. The beautiful way my cloth is moved by hand. The caress inside from the one who whispers in my ear, who seduces falling, courting it and breathing in my ear, now laid to rest, arrested in this breathing in my ear. The 5 fingers of his cane inside me to accompany the story of our injury in the whirlpool of delicious angles, our inquiry into the general complicity, the subjunctive blow now, if you want to, the prosthetic rest of no fixed point, the rest of the arrested and displaced, the inured in the secret language of specific questions, irrevocable, irrecoverable, as if a certain kind of church that might be where we get ready to leave church, held in the nativity again of black weather and obliterate, out of the open in that more earthly engineer. It lasts through pauses and continuous projects, an arpeggio of heft, of handing, and crosshatch symphonies of gesture. If you could just feel the weight of your body, it would be okay. But that's okay, because I can feel it, because your body is my body, if I could just feel the weight of my body. But would it be okay if we went out in the street? Let's take all these hand puppets from the shadows to drift like snow in a broken conference of who would have been outside to turn the turn away. Eventually, that would have been the plan. That would have been the mood, almost like being in love with dispossession in advance. What's left of one last improvising, one last hearing, an unbearably slow climbing of the stairs and traversal of steam and altered daily and broken symmetry, and then it's open too, and then here they come, native again, already again in the sound of all that is the case. Church refuses virtuosity and fallenness. We fall through virtue in virtue of our nastiness, forgiven in giving all we have away, in being given to this sin of turning, promiscuous in spinning out in all this rub fallen wailing and laughing, all this rub string laughing we be doing all the time, always resisting rest at work all the time, in and out of time, time and again, taught all the time, native again already in tuning pans, in preparing hubcaphones for sharing, step echoed, evening entered, slack in residual study of exude. Evangeline, we play our incompleteness. We disarrange in little groups of little instruments we arrange all across the little world we disavow, the one that kills us one by one. All that's left of church is us in all that beauty, which is untranslatable if you know the language, if you ain't been falled, if you ain't been calling, if you're defining all been sun and shade by nude. So I'm gonna read 2 more, but I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back to a book called B. Jenkins, which is named for my mom. So when she comes, well, she comes with me everywhere I go. She sent me here. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have been here for which I must thank her, even though it was a hard thing to do in many ways. So I read these two poems that begin and end B. Jenkins for her. B. Jenkins, her territory sunflower, insurgent floor time in real time in the Field Museum. Bertha Lee and her lyric ways and her urban plan. Up and down the regular highway in every two-tone station, passing through to cure, for preservation to unfold it all away. She put the new thing in the open cell one more time about the theory of who we are. In the names away in blocks with double names to interrupt and gather, kept dancing in tight circles between break and secret, vaulted with records in our basement, where the long-haired hippies and Afro-blacks all get together across the tracks and they party, everybody sewn like grain and touched in stride. Now, the cold new reckoning is tired, and you've been waiting for a preferential song. The multiplex should be in the frame like bodies in a house way back in the woods, fled in suspended projects like the real thing, posed for the midnight trill. Essential shtetl of the world stage, born way before you was born, move the administered word by breathing to hand beautiful edge around. And then one more B. Jenkins. Just so you know, no one could have told me you didn't want to go outside. This exercise is phonographed to take the receiver and call you for something we hear together. Some of the same stories, some of the same things. To stretch repeat so thin it fades to various is the aim of the phone call. The phonograph is also a photograph of movement and what it bears. You found dancers waiting for dances. Your silhouette is patient form. I know you can't. I know you can make it if you try. I'm getting along all right. I say a little prayer. Mama's baby Sadie Mae, Miss Davis blue and red. At the Duck Inn, mighty lions roar. You and Bobby Bradford run away together. This earth-toned air is B.C. Marx's Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Asleep in new pajamas at the Desert Inn, to walk Joe Williams' Peaceway home to Waycross, you and me against the world, every time we say goodbye. I'll be seeing you in all the unfamiliar places where they till our long advance. This is the cluster song of our romance. Thank you. Christina said I can answer questions if anybody has any, but you don't have to have any if you don't want to. All right. Oh.
Thank you so much for bringing your work to us today. It was a really, really powerful experience. I kind of had a question about sort of Blackness as a diasporic positionality. I guess so. I'm like Nigerian American, and I've been thinking a lot about like my own positionality in the United States as someone who is an immigrant to a settler colonial state. But in a lot of ways, the way in which I'm interpreted by the world and by the world like at large as in context and sort of like in conjunction with folks who were, bought and sold. And even though that's not necessarily like my experience or my ancestral experience, I've been trying to think about ways to wrestle with that in my own positionality, like as a Black person who's not a descendant of slaves. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, that's a big, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We maybe you know more about your family than I do, know more about your ancestry than I do. I don't know. I would imagine it could be true, might not be true, But I would say that, it's at least possible that you are, in fact, the descendants of slaves, right? In the same way that, of course, it is almost surely true that I am the descendant of slave traders. You see? I've desperately wanted to be able to make a really good, solid argument for why it is that Blackness is best understood as a social force and not an identity. And it's not because I don't have some interest in the question of identity, and it's not because I want to denigrate people who are maybe more interested in that than me. It's just because I think that at the end of the day, identity is the residue of a bad political, philosophical project that we'd probably be better off relinquishing in general, right? Now, but it's hard to give it up, It's hard for me to give it up. I'm so committed to and cathected to my folks, my family. And I don't want to give up being committed to and cathected to my family. So the only way it seems to me that I can do justice to both of these projects, to both of those commitments, to be committed to my folks and my family, and to be committed to the eradication of identity, is to continually broaden out the concept of my folks and my family. Now, that's a hard row to hoe. And it's also the paradisiacal garden, And it's just a long-winded way of saying that with regard to Blackness and with regard to the intensity of my commitment to the general set of my folks and the more specific and particular set of my folks who are Black, the distinction between immigrant and Native, given our history, seems to me utterly nonsensical. Like, I just don't know what that's got to do with the history of Black people in the world, or with the specific histories that emerge out of the African diaspora, particularly recognizing that internal relations in the continent that came to be called Africa were already diasporic, right? So I just don't know what that has. So it's not that I'm not trying to answer your question, it's just that I'm trying to take that question, which is a deep and good question, and see if we can together make it even more precise, and to see if we can figure out a way to relinquish some of the terms that we think we have to put this question in, but which turn out to betray what it is we want when we ask the question, So.
Hello, Dr. Moten. Thank you very much for sharing your words and your heart with us tonight. As a film scholar, I've spent a lot of time with Baldwin's Devil Finds work, and so I was just curious if you could talk a little bit more about what you're after in invoking that particular moment of that text, which I have always found to be one of the most striking of the whole thing.
Well, some of it is just those three epigraphs are really important just because, the first one from Notes of a Native Son is from the little autobiographical sketch. And I was immediately convinced that if we take seriously this throwaway line that Baldwin gives us about always wanting, really having this morbid desire to be an experimental filmmaker, it gives us access to all this stuff that's going on in his writing. And it then links back to Devil Finds work, in which he's telling us, how much it is that films and that cinema inform the way he sees and the way he thinks about things. So for me, it was really important then to see that little passage from The Fire Next Time, which for me is like deeply, deeply cinematic. The grammar of that passage is weird. It's almost as if he's saying, it's like, imagine that him and his boys are in a wine and urine-stained hallway, but he's describing it as if he were from outside of it, but he's describing his indelible presence within that same scene. So it's like, imagine that the camera is moving like a finger pointing, like in a deictic way, right? Like literally, indexically, the camera moves into the scene, and eventually what the camera arrives at and points to is Baldwin's own heart. It's his finger on which his eye is situated, but it's pointing finally towards him in that scene, because he doesn't look at us from outside. He's with us when he looks at us, And there's so much strife and horror in what it, I remember one of the worst things you could do in my neighborhood is look at somebody, right? You'd be like, who you looking at? What you looking at, right? We knew as kids already that there was a kind of violence that we were constantly subject to being black kids. And that violence was primarily perpetrated on us by us, which is how come that was the quickest way to get in a fight. Who you looking at, right? And so I believe that Baldwin is constantly asking that question. Langston Hughes is constantly asking that question. When Langston asks it, he augments it, because who you're looking at morphs into who you're listening to, right? So for Baldwin, what I think The Devil Finds work really does is it tries to provide for us the outline and the framework for a kind of ethics of black looking, right? It does a whole bunch of other stuff. It does many, many things. And it's a beautiful, great, great book. And of course, what's crucial, I think, and is sometimes left unspoken, although one doesn't understand how it could be left unspoken, is that the ethics of Baldwin's black looking is always queer looking. And that's deeply embedded in that passage, that moment of identification, both with the eyes of his mother, but also with Betty Davis's eyes. And I remember when the Raoul Peck film came out, and I was teaching and I was looking at these clips of Baldwin doing interviews. And I was so fascinated by how adept he was at using his eyes in an expressive way, right? And I start finding all these clips of Betty. There's a horrible, but kind of great, but horrible Betty Davis film called Jezebel. It's like Gone with the Wind, but worse, kind of. And she's like playing this sort of, capricious, won't do right Southern belle who is getting ready to get married to Henry Fonda, but he's sort of weird and kind of constantly ambivalent about how she behaves. And eventually he goes north and marries some demure northern white woman, and she's like trying to get him back. and there's this one scene where she's apologizing to him without knowing that he's about to get married to this woman. And it's just, and what she's doing with her eyes is just like, what's the word? Lethal, right? And I think also, and another actress he talks about a lot in The Devil Finds Work is Sylvia Sidney, who's got a similar kind of thing with her eye. And if you look at like Baldwin being interviewed by whoever, David Susskind or William F. Buckley, he's doing these things with his eyes, right? That's like right out of the Betty Davis, Sylvia Sidney playbook, you know? And it's, but I'm thinking that he's also doing something with his eyes in his writing too, you know? So I was trying to get at that a little bit. So, yeah. All right, that's enough. Time to go. Oh.